Hello economics students, in this video we're going to continue our journey in monetary policy. We're almost finished. We're going to look at the stance of monetary policy, whether it is expansionary, which is also known as accommodative in monetary policy land, or contractionary, which is also known as restrictive in monetary policy land. And we're also going to look at this thing called neutral, or the neutral rate of interest. Now, the concept of the stance of monetary policy is exactly the same as the stance of budgetary policy, which we looked at in the last outcome. It's just that budgetary policy uses revenues and expenses to determine its impact on aggregate demand. Monetary policy uses conventional and unconventional tools like the cash rate target and forward guidance to influence its impact on aggregate demand. So, I hope that made sense. Basically, we're thinking, how is the RBA using conventional and unconventional tools to influence aggregate demand? What is its intention with those tools? So, of course, its intention is the same when we looked at budgetary policy. They're either trying to contract the economy, which means to take a contractionary stance and decrease aggregate demand, or they're trying to expand the economy, which means to take an expansionary stance and increase aggregate demand. A couple of extra words here. You may read in some of the RBA's writing that they talk about tightening and loosening monetary policy. This doesn't tell us necessarily about the stance. This just tells us about the direction of the cash rate. So tightening would just be to increase the cash rate target, and loosening would just be to decrease the cash rate target. So a loosening is trying to loosen up the economy, so you decrease the cash rate. Or if you want to tighten up the economy, slow down growth, you increase the cash rate. Now, Lucy Ellis here has made this statement about monetary policy neutrality, probably my third favorite economist at the RBA. It's a very simple statement. It says when the policy interest rate or the cash rate target is low enough, it stimulates demand. What she's saying is it increases aggregate demand. And when it's high enough, it restrains aggregate demand or restricts aggregate demand. What she's saying is it'll decrease aggregate demand. Somewhere in the middle, there must be a rate that is neither contractionary or expansionary, or in other words, has no impact on aggregate demand. Aggregate demand equals exactly the same. I don't know how to write that. So, what's she talking about? This rate in the middle is called the neutral rate of interest. It's a rate of interest that is neither expansionary or contractionary. Now, it's very hard to work out exactly where this neutral rate of interest is, but the RBA believes that there is some rate that will neither discourage or encourage spending and borrowing, and they call that the neutral rate of interest. Now, you can see here the RBA has published what it thinks is the neutral rate of interest. It's very hard to actually find out exactly what this rate is. They have a model that tries to predict it, and the model has a range of like 2%. You can see it could be somewhere in between about 5 and 3%, the neutral rate. But we're just going to go on the average here. I think that's the average. We're just going to assume that about 3% is neither expansionary nor contractionary. Now, what does this mean for you as a VCE student? Well, it means that we're going to use this same little rule to determine the monetary policy stance. Anytime interest rates or the cash rate target is above 3%, we call that a contractionary stance. Anytime interest rates or the cash rate target is below 3%, we call that an expansionary stance. Then to add a little bit of a flavor to that between one period and the next, we're going to say if we ever move closer to neutral, we just add less in front of one of these, either expansionary or contractionary. And if we ever move away from neutral, we just add more in front of these. So let's have a look at that on this little chart. So if interest rates increase from about 4% to 5%, we know that that's above 3%, so it's a contractionary stance. We're just going to say because it's moving away from neutral, it's more contractionary. And if we move back down towards neutral, it's still above 3%, so it's contractionary. We're just going to call it less contractionary. Now, the other way of doing this is to say that an increasing interest rates over here would also be called a tightening. Remember the language from that last video? Tightening. So I'm not going to write these all out. And this decrease in interest rates would be called a loosening. Okay, what happens if we're below 3? Well, this is going to be expansionary, but we're moving away from neutral, so it's going to become more expansionary as it moves towards 0. And if we increase, but we're still below 3%, we're less expansionary. And again, this would be called a loosening. This would be called a tightening. So what is the stance of monetary policy over the past 2 years? And you do need to think about the stance's effect on the achievement of our goals. I don't think this chart does the extent to which the RBA has increased interest rates justice, but the RBA has, as of I think May 2022, started raising the cash rate target at the fastest rate in its history. It's done this super fast. I think it raised rates 11 months in a row over this period. But over this period of relative pain for households and businesses who have debt, the RBA did not start to take a contractionary stance until, as we now know, the interest rate was above 3%, which was about, probably the end of 2023. So despite all the pain and the impact on households' budgets, the stance could not be called contractionary until about 2023, which means between this period here, the stance was still expansionary, just less expansionary. And as it moved above this neutral rate of interest, we started calling it contractionary. And the more it moves upwards, we can call it more contractionary. So if the RBA continues to raise the cash rate between now and your exam, we can call that more contractionary. In your own time, you need to think about the impact of this on the achievement of the goals. We've talked a lot about it in class and over these videos anyway, so I'm going to leave that to you. All right, bye for now.